we have three things. One is the libation by Professor Anani Dizenyo from Africana Studies. Then some opening remarks about the exhibition by Mr. Preston Stindale. And then some closing remarks from me, and then we're all finished. So, Anani, all yours.
Thank you. Good evening, everybody. Since we are concerned with the heritage of slavery and the justice which flows from that, it is appropriate that we connect back to continental Africa, where a lot of this journey began. And to that end, I'm going to pour some libation. Libation is communication with ancestors, spirits, here, there, and everywhere. And in order not to interrupt what I say in two Ghanaian languages, Ewe and Fanti, I think there's translation which has been provided. So you have to go through this with me. I am going to pour both water and then liquor. So, here we go. Mpenyimfo, nananom, ebusuafo, enuanom, beebiara wo hon, nde ifida, yehiem Brown University, osande, enuanom na wodwon fi Africa, wodwon ba America, onye United States, nkwete Brazil, Cuba ni nyina. Wamba na wana nanum wogudu warafna. Onam dementi na hiaha bebe yesu ade chirade wo hei. Hem mame peyina ncho ohwe hadron Rusimons na committee na wode share why ho adwen there. Yen yi ho na yo, yen tintron. I'm a Center for Study of Slavery and Race and Justice, and why baby nkrofubo to me baby waba na waba ubusua do ha. Osande ansande e be hye bibiasen why dear from near from sa ada or the shasi nsu one jinsu no me mo hwe hand na bibia ye be nso onye enti e from nsa na from onam there Henry Penny Simons, Nankasa Otukwan, or the call Ghana, Otukwan, or the call Cape Coast. Ah, Coffee Binum so ha, walk or Nina. I share a gruma, I share a drunk of 4 years and see I brought for a friend rum. And so I'm the minty, yes, Yabamahon, rum. Nanchadi, Yenya Roma, Ofi, Haiti, or Sanda Juana, in Mianumna Ofi, Africa, what Jifa Hudi. Ni yenye hate dinti ye the Jamaica di ye bogu from the Mara. See one just one no hwe na bibia o be so onye yi. Dem ma wa woni mun nka no nche nyipo ogunsan ono no onum sa na yenye ne dab. Yes wara one man krofa obaba aha. De obosua de obobo buku mnu. Won boy ho adwenum. I'm Africana sukakra hen so yayen no so won from twado am wa ye am hen enti yemhonu suka ho bio na ye kani nyina awia ye nyimde nsu na nsade otede epo obiara ompo epo obiara so oji nsu na hen krofo wakade se pedenyi nyankopon kasa chemframa manframa onfa asema bakan onfa kama nyankopon onam de menti oya esuade mehen nti memfa nsen bi so nka ho bi nti se ayegu se na nsu di yeda Brown ase yeda President Parks na yeda President awabasino ko Simon Sase yɛda Africana ase yɛda Paget ase I don't know how African handle nti sɛsi a yɛaka sɛ yɛwie di sɛ nka no a nkyerɛ dɛ monom nsi bɛ ndɛ monom nti medi sefo nti Tony edwuma a ɛsi mbɛdin ɛmi maayɛ mi dze ewie nti sɛsi a so wankasa etum kasa.
Thank you very much, Professor Digenio. And now Mr. Preston will speak very briefly about the exhibition. Dr. Simmons, if you want to, please.
While President Simmons is moving to her seat, let us give her another round of applause. The profundity of what she unleashed in the initiative that has culminated in this center and the work that will follow cannot be overstated. Cannot be overstated. This subject and this mission was buried so deep in the American consciousness or subconsciousness, if you will, that our highest institutions of higher learning were unaware or chose to be unaware of the import. When President Simmons commissioned the study, so many of our peers responded by stating that they had no connection whatsoever with slavery. They backtracked, they backpedaled. At best, they claimed they were tangentially involved. It's as Katrina Brown, whose family hailed from Bristol, Rhode Island, and she did the documentary Traces of the Trade, a story from the Deep North. And in that documentary, she states that in her family, the DeWolf family, which was the largest slave trading family in America, and of course, Rhode Island was the slave trading capital in the country. And her family, it was understood that you did not discuss politics, and I'm not sure of the second. Someone maybe can help me. Sex, all right. There we go. And the third issue you did not discuss were the Negroes. Didn't discuss that. Didn't exist. And I want to say that the flack and the tension and the upset that President Simmons caught when this initiative undertook cannot be overlooked. So that's why I asked for that applause. And also I would say we need to also give kudos to President Paxson, because she has very strongly and forcefully indicated her determination to continue with this mission. Now, to show you how deeply buried it was in the consciousness of the peer institutions, it took the book Ebony and Ivy by Craig Wilder, when he came out and outed all of the original oldest institutions of this country, all of the Ivy League institutions, including William and Mary, as to their connection to slavery. And so, once again, Brown is on the cutting edge, in the vanguard. Brown is moving forward and leading. And this center has the potential, as it has already done, lead the way in a manner that can be earth-shattering and moving for this country in addressing an issue that has long been unaddressed. The students who, and the individuals who, African-American individuals who kept that long tradition, starting, of course, with the enslaved Africans who came here and worked at Brown. And the tradition continued, when those individuals, African Americans, were able to come here as students and as educators and as faculty and as administrators. Of course, our first known graduate, Inman Page, all of you have heard. And one of the most profound aspects of Inman Page, you realize that in 1877, he was named the class orator. Once again, Brown being at the vanguard. And everybody who knows, you may know that right now I'm speaking of the strong aspects of Brown. There are aspects with slavery. Understand, slavery, it was permeated every aspect of American life. It was not a side note. It was the main event of America. It was the most prominent feature of America for so many years. But Inman Page, in 1877, his classmates voted him the class orator. And they weren't doing this as some sort of, nice gesture. At that point in time, it was an affront for an African American to hold a leadership position over white Americans. It was considered an affront, and he was named as the class orator. And he is the first known graduate, along with George Washington Milford, African American to graduate from Brown University. Now, when I say the first known, there's always a little caveat. Those of us who've been from this country a long time can relate to a book that recently came out, another book, A Chosen Exile, Black People Passing in White America. So the fact of the matter is, no doubt there were other African Americans who passed through here, but they did not pass through as African Americans, because that was not allowed, and that, of course, was dangerous. And the interesting aspect of that book is it takes it from a different aspect, as opposed to Imitation of Life, which talks about why people left to gain a better life, and there was no doubt that was the case. But Allison Hobbs, focuses on what was lost when they had to leave all their ties and connections to their history and their traditions. That already happened to African Americans once when they were brought here, kidnapped and brought as enslaved individuals. But then secondarily, these individuals who had to pass, and often it was an incredibly gut-wrenching decision because they had to leave their families to do so. And America is a very interesting place. All of us know, African Americans, of course, know, and most of you know of the so-called one-drop rule, where America, different from many of our sister colonies or nations in the Americas, if you were considered to have one drop of African blood, that made you African. However, America also, long before Bill Clinton and what we heard of, also had a don't ask, don't tell. So if you looked the part and decided that you wanted to leave and move to different environments, no one really was going to question too deeply what your roots were unless you decided to do something foolish like speak up for the rights of African Americans. So, as a result, many individuals left and chose that life, and it was very tough. And in her book, I'll just point one aspect, I'll just read one passage, which kind of encapsulates what happened even prior to all the institutions. There's the story of Harry S. Murphy, who was assigned as an ROTC cadet to the University of Mississippi by a commander who assumed Murphy was white. For a year, Harry had a ball at Ole Miss, Hobbs laughs. He ran track, dated white girls, was known as a terrific dancer. That should have been the giveaway. Years later, the university fought to keep James Meredith from registering as the first black student. Harry Murphy gleefully broke the news. Ole Miss was fighting a battle they had no idea they'd lost years ago. Yeah, the fact was, this happened. But it in no way diminishes the role that Inman Page played, because it was so difficult for African Americans to attend the university. And as I said, here it was 12 years after the end of the Civil War, here he was named class orator. Right at the start of the end of Reconstruction, when you would see the destruction of the gains that African Americans made. Because you do know when slavery ended, African Americans made incredible strides. Incredible strides. All of a sudden they were paid for what they could do. And when they were paid for what they could do, it drew the attention and anger of so many in this country. So in Tulsa and in Atlanta, in Wilmington, North Carolina, you had where the Africans who had achieved, they were disenfranchised, and much like the individuals in Iraq who were sent up into the mountains, the elected officials were thrown out, cast out. There were massacres which took place, and they were moved away. And years of intergenerational wealth were lost. After Edmund Page, we had 5 of the first 20 or so African American graduates from Brown went on to become college presidents. Ethel T. Roberts in 2005 was Brown's first black woman graduate and went on to help found the nation's first black sorority. Samuel Nabrett, a PhD, class of 32, who was Brown's first black PhD recipient, became the first black named to the U.S. Atomic Energy Commission, now the Nuclear Regulatory Commission. J. Saunders Redding, class of 28, became the first black professor to teach in the Ivy League in 1949 on a visiting basis for 1 semester at Brown. Wallace Terry in 1959 became the first black editor-in-chief of an Ivy League newspaper while at Brown, and went on to become the first black news magazine reporter of a white major publication, Time magazine. Now fast forward, because my time is getting short here, and as you can see as a lawyer I can go on, and Tony gave me the sign. But in 1967, I wish to bring to the attention Glenn Dixon, who was the first coordinator of the Afro-American Society. And we have some members here. Those persons who remember that first group of Afro-American Society, would you please raise your hand? Yes, give them a round of applause. And in 1968, those members, in the midst of all of the turmoil that was going on in America, you had Columbia, you had Michigan, you had Wisconsin, you had the anti-war movement, incredible turmoil. The students at Brown had the genius of figuring a strategy. And their strategy seemed simple, but it was profound. They walked down the hill to the Congdon Street Baptist Church, walked off the campus, and insisted that Brown would bring in more African American students, faculty, and administrators. And when they did that, they did not know what was going to happen. There were no happy endings in store for them. I mean, they had just been, there were just a few, there weren't that many blacks on the campus to begin with. And they dared to walk off to make a difference. And they wound up on the front page of the New York Times. All news services carried, yes. And as a result, as a result of that, all of the persons of color who now come came from that move. My class, the class of 73, we were the direct beneficiaries. The administrators who were brought in. Dick Nurse already had started as the first African-American member of the admission office, class of 61. My father, the late James Tisdale, as a result of that walkout, he became the first development/admission officer in the New York office, and later became the special assistant to Don Hornig. You had Nanette Reynolds who came, Charles Nichols. You had William Brown came, Anderson Kurtz became, who also was of that initial Afro-American Society, became a member of the administration. And from that dare to do, that determination, once again, Brown being cutting edge, its students being cutting edge, we see what has been spawned here. Now I wish to end by letting you know that once again, we cannot understate the courage and the importance of the work of Dr. Simmons, the determination of President Paxson to pursue this mission, and I would point out the importance of each and every one of you, members of the alumni, that we make sure that this center becomes the guiding light of this work in the nation, because this work cannot be understated in its importance. Drawing that line, connecting those dots from slavery is what has been missing and why we have not been able to resolve the racial woes that we have to this day. So I say to you, we know in the great words of the late, great Langston Hughes in his poem, "Let America Be America Again," I would say also, let us all work to make the dream of America a reality for all in future years to come. Thank you.
Thank you very, very much. Ladies and gentlemen, guests, distinguished guests, I would like to begin my closing remarks with some words of thanks. Thanks to Dr. Simmons, whose vision and commitment created the space for the work of the committee and then eventually this center. Thanks to President Paxton, who has supported the continuation of this work. I would also like to thank two former provosts, David Cursor and Mark Shichels. One former dean of faculty, Rajiv Vora, and the current dean of the faculty, Kevin McLaughlin. David and Rajiv first suggested to me that I serve as the director of the center. I remember saying to them, no, because I felt that the center's work and its development needed to be carried on by someone else who did not serve on the committee. Later on, Mark and Kevin, along with Professor Walker, Corey Walker, and Dr. Simmons in 2012, made another attempt. And I said yes. This building would not have been possible without the remarkable support of Mark and of Kevin. Would not have been possible. They made it possible, both of them, former provost and the dean of the faculty, made sure that we got the funding to renovate this building. And the university really owes them a great deal for doing that. The renovation of the building was a creative task from which I learned a great deal about construction, about the various laws of what governs how high something could be before you need something else, as well as about design. And I learned from a number of people who worked assiduously with us. And I want to thank them. I want to thank Chris Lattis and Eric from the architectural design firm. I want to thank Nelson Ferreira and his team from TRAC, particularly somebody who we knew as Manny, because he was here all the time. And Manny was a man who I would come in the morning, I would see him, I'd leave here at 9 o'clock, 10 o'clock at night, and I would see him. And I began to see him almost as a family member. And he spoke English, because he was just from Portugal, and we had really a set of conversations that I thought were important. I want to thank Diane from the Creative Pavilion, Office Pavilion, as well as Cliff Rennex, Anthony Costello, the people from Yard Works. And I also would like to thank especially Bill Gauntlet from Facilities, who no longer is with us, and Lycan, because all of them worked in their different ways to make this a possibility. And they worked with me and Ms. Warrenberg and others in trying to grapple with the ways in which we wanted this space to be conceptualized a little differently, and for the building, both the building and the external space, to be a special space on Brown's campus. I will miss the weekly 9 o'clock Wednesday morning meetings, which we had for nearly a year, and in which we attempted to translate the set of ideas that myself and others had about what this building should look like. So thank you very much, architects, facilities, and all the persons who worked with us. I would also like to thank Professor Augusto, who is one of the most creative scholars that I know, who, when I presented her with the challenge and the opportunity of creating a slave garden, she took it up and ran with it, and created what Cliff Resnick says from facilities, as I debated with facilities about what this was and could we have this. And the debate, I never forget the morning, it was at 9:30, one of our meetings, and I'm trying to wax lyrical about what this means and so on. And Cliff looks at me and says, "You mean it's a cultural exposition?" I said, "Yes, Cliff, that's what it is." And that's clinched the argument, so to speak. So I would like to thank Professor Augusto for doing this, what Cliff calls this cultural exposition, and what I like to call an artifact of educative beauty. So thank you very much, Professor Augusto. I would like to thank the Faculty Advisory Committee for all their support in the last 2 years, the external board led by Dr. Simmons and Ms. Deborah Lee for their support as well. And I want to have special thanks to two people who in a very short time have displayed a certain attachment to the center. And they are Robert Ferreira, who does the gardens, as well as Maria Lima, who is our custodian. And the kind of discussions I have with both the custodian and the person who's in charge of the garden is, in my view, remarkable. And Maria is trying desperately to teach me Portuguese sometimes. I'd also like to thank Jane Lancaster for her historical research, which she has shared with me. And thanks also to the persons who made this event possible: Marissa Quinn, Michael Thorpe, Jane, Jay, Giovanni, people who did the exhibition, Ben Kaplan, Karen Allen Baxter, Alonzo Jones, and the archivist Renee Nelly. And I would also like to thank Anani for his libations. Finally, my warmest thanks to Miss Shana Weinberg, the anchor for the center, the administrative person who makes things turn over very efficiently, as well as Miss Ruth Clark and our new associate director, Professor Roque Ferreira. This building marks one moment in the history of Brown's 250 years. It is also the realization of a process which began in 2003. In a profound way, history is about understanding action in human affairs, what we do, the kind of sedimented deposits which cross space and time. We are now in a present time and space, in which the past hovers like a specter, because we have not yet worked it through in the present to get to the other side, to get to that somewhere else. And here, I am not speaking about a conversation on race, one which our nation desperately needs to have. Rather, I am speaking about a conversation that recognizes the humanness, the humanity of the formerly enslaved. A conversation that comes to grip with what we are as humans today, what we have been, and therefore what we may become. The remit of the center is about a certain kind of memory work, about historical knowledge, about legacies, about contemporary forms of injustice and human bondage. But it is also about possibilities. And to make those possibilities real, to create a new ground, so to speak, we should recall the words of the slave Iman Page, who was a slave before he came to this university. And in his graduation address, he talked about, and here I quote him, a past in the living present, end of quote. So how does one confront the past, working through it to the other side, so that the living present that Page speaks about may become a ground of possibility? Derek Walcott, the Caribbean poet, reminds us that in trying to make any new history, that we have to begin with the processes of naming. On August the 2nd, 1784, the first president of Brown University, James Manning, years after he's president of Brown University, appears before the Providence Town Council with his black servant, Lewis Manning. This is what the council record says. The Reverend Mr. James Manning, having represented to this council that he is desirous of manumitting and setting free his Negro manservant, about 30 years of age, who being personally present, appears likely to obtain his own subsistence without being inchargeable to the public, this council therefore consent to and approve of the manumission of the said Lewis to the late act of the General Assembly authorizing the manumission of slaves. End of quote. If one of the grounds for the new possibilities that we speak about begins with naming, should we not then name this building after Leslie Manning and call it the Leslie Manning Center for Study of Slavery and Justice in honor of the slave who lived on this campus? I want to thank all of you for joining us on this special occasion. I ask you to stay around for the reception if you want, to tour the building and the gardens if you please, to look at the exhibition and to say thanks again for attending this special occasion. Thank you all very much.